when I was younger, I'd look at other people and I'd go, I'd be really happy if I was making your work. I'm very self-critical, and I never really liked anything that I made in the past. And I think probably the biggest thing is, discovering a style that I actually really enjoy making.
I'm Bob Acton, and I'm pleased to introduce Georgie Gardiner to you in this episode. Georgie is a wonderful potter in the UK. She studied workshop ceramics at Harrow and then ran her studio at the Chocolate Factory in Stoke Newington for 10 years before moving to Surrey, where she now has a garden studio. She creates distinctive bowls and vessels on the wheel. Each piece is unique. The decoration is cut from paper by hand and applied to the leather-hard clay before adding layers of color. The paper is then peeled back to reveal the bold graphic motifs before firing. I hope you enjoy this conversation where we talked about color, surface design, and the challenges about working with clay. All the notes will contain links to her websites and Instagram.
Welcome to Color in Ceramics, the podcast for ceramic artists who want valuable ideas about using color from leading artists and world-class experts. Here's your host, Bob Acton, a sculptor and ceramic artist who's fascinated with color and how potters, sculptors, and artists use color in their work. Tune in as he talks with his guests about color, techniques, and the impact of color on people and art itself.
Georgie, thanks so much for joining us here today on the Color in Ceramics podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time and the opportunity for us to learn more about your beautiful work that you do in the UK.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you
absolutely.
for inviting me on.
Oh, you're most welcome. I was enthralled with the colors that you use in your work, and I'm sure that lots of people will be interested in some of the techniques that you use, although I've got your Instagram set up here on my computer. So I'm looking at it as we're chatting, and I can see that you are sharing many of your techniques on there.
Yes.
Already. So that's pretty cool. I obviously this work that you do has taken years of hard work and
Yeah.
consistency and so on. I wonder if you could tell us just a little bit about your journey, where you started and what you've done to get you here today.
Sure. Well, I left school at 16, and school was horrible. I hated it. And I really didn't know what I wanted to do. So I got onto a secretarial course, and I lasted a couple of months there. And I knew I definitely didn't want to work in an office. And a friend had suggested a window dressing course, which was a BTEC diploma, a 2-year course, which I got onto, and they did half-day ceramics on that course. And I found that I was spending all of my time in the ceramic department. All my window displays had some kind of element of clay. And when we had to do work experience, I went and did a week's work experience with a potter up in Nottingham. And I just fell in love with clay there. I did do clay at school, but I didn't really do anything very good at school. But it was at college that I kind of came into myself. I discovered a bit more about the things I liked, and I discovered Lucy Ree as well, and she had quite an impact, not just because of her work, but the fact that she was still potting in her 80s. That was a really major influence, and from then I just I wanted to be a potter, and I wanted to do it forever. I didn't, want to have a job and retire from it. So from there, I did an arts foundation for a year and specialised in ceramics. And then after that, I got onto a degree course at Harrow, which was workshop ceramics. So it was a very practical degree. Learned how to, dig your clay, make clay, glazes, build your own kilns. And, it was just an amazing time. We had lots of visiting lecturers. This was in the early 90s. So courses were free, believe it or not. And they had money for, all these amazing people to come in and talk about their work, which was just incredible. I spent, a lot of time mixing up my own glazes and everything, but I never really came up with anything that I must have made up 1,000 glazes, but didn't really come up with anything that I really thought I wanted to use.
I know what you mean. I've got a box. I've got probably 3 boxes of little test tiles in my studio where I've mixed up different things and tried them at different temperatures and firing schedules, but I never really found something that really worked for me.
No, I mean, some people, they hit on a glaze and it just works for them. I was always looking for that kind of one glaze that was the one.
Yeah.
And so many disappointments. I'm not a big shiny person. I don't like shiny glazes. One aspect of Lucy Ree that I really was drawn to was her matte work with the sgraffito lines, very delicate lines in kind of the blacks, and I was very, very drawn to that.
Mm-hmm. She does have beautiful work. I too am drawn to her work, and often I'll reference that when I do very different things now, but I find myself really loving her work as well. Yeah.
I wrote her a letter once when I was young. I never posted it to her, and I regret that because she died shortly afterwards. But she was the biggest influence on me wanting to be a potter. Definitely.
Yeah. And it sounds like that you really paid attention to what you loved and went with that, as opposed to doing something in your life career-wise that somebody said you should do versus something that you wanted.
Yeah, definitely. I feel quite lucky that it was in my about 18 that I really thought this is what I want to do, and then how do I get to that point, and everything, all the college courses and everything. I was at college for quite a long time, probably about 7 years, but I knew where I wanted to get to, which was having my own studio and making my own work. I just didn't know what work that would be. That the thing with clay is there's such a variety of what you can make, which is the beauty of it, but it's quite overwhelming. And especially at university, I did a lot of chopping and changing, and experimenting. Because it was workshop ceramics, it was a very practical course, and they had 2 solid days of throwing, production throwing. So learning how to repeat a shape. So you'd throw, cut it in half, and you wouldn't be precious about anything. And I think that was a really important grounding, because I've always the wheel has always been my passion. I just find it magical, and I still find it magical.
It's addictive in some ways, isn't it?
It is.
You get touched on by clay, and you can't stop.
Yeah.
Hey, tell us a little bit about what you mean by workshop ceramics. So you mentioned that a couple of times.
That was the title of it. So I think it started in the 60s. It was quite a well-known course at Harrow, well regarded. And I think when I went there, it was in a bit of a transition. It didn't really know whether it was still very much a practical course. We made our own glazes, and we had a big clay pit outside where even in the winter, you'd have to, dig your own clay and pug it back into being usable clay. And it taught you everything you needed to know to have your own business. So you had business studies as well. So it was a very practical course, but at the time that I went, it was trying to be a bit more arty as well. So it kind of didn't know what it was. And I'm very much, I don't really do art speak. My pots have no greater deep meaning to them. I'm quite practical. I like beauty and things. I try and make beautiful work as opposed to something with deep meaning. But I think a lot of the time at university, they wanted you to, have all this deep meaning to your work. And I struggled a bit with that, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, you've obviously hit a really great spot in your work. You have many, many followers on social media, and people love your work, and you're very successful. So good for you.
Yeah, it's funny about, people love the peel and reveal videos, but I think that was in lockdown I started to post those. But up until then, I thought, people wouldn't be interested in my work because it takes so long. It would be like watching paint dry. There's a lot of time in between, and that's the beauty of speeded up speeded up film, especially to put to nice music as well. So I quite enjoy watching those back as well.
So you mentioned that it takes a long time to create your work. Can you describe for people? I'm sure people will go to your website and your Instagram site, and we'll make posts or we'll include all that information in the show notes. But tell people a little bit about your work and what you do and how you do it.
Sure. Well, I decorate with paper resist. And it's a technique that I've been doing for about 20 years. It's quite a simple technique in that you take paper. I now use plain newsprint like fish and chip paper. So it's nothing special. It's not, sticky. It's not plastic coated or anything. It's kind of once use only. And I cut by hand with a scalpel, either leaf shapes or, stems that wrap around my pots. I apply it with water and I do everything at the greenware stage. So it's still got, a dampness to the clay. So the paper will then stick to the clay. And I decorate with engobes that I mix up myself. So an engobe is like a slip, but it's got a bit of flux added to it. So whereas a slip, you would need a shiny glaze to bring the colour out. An engobe has that bit of flux in it. So you can apply it like a slip. You can also apply it onto bisque as well. But I apply it like a slip and it becomes like a skin, on the clay, on the piece. And I will brush on 4 or 5 coats of, thinnish colour to get that solidness. And the reason I do that is I don't want any thick brush marks. I'd use a soft brush and I'll cross hatch quite quickly, so there's no kind of text. There's a slight texture in that, and I like that. Everything is going back to when I throw them. Everything is thrown, and I will apply a white engobe before I start decorating, because although I love throwing, I don't want any slight turning marks or anything like that. So I will really turn my pieces till they almost squeak, till they're like almost burnished. And then I will apply this 3 or 4 coats of white engobe, again cross hatching, so you get a blank canvas but you get a very slight texture. So it's all, I love hand built pottery, and I think the shapes that you can get in hand building small bases going, flaring up. I love that kind of shape, but I love throwing. So I don't want to have, I want something that's thrown. So it's the best of both worlds. I throw something, but I almost make it look slightly hand built by putting this kind of slight texture on. And then I'll apply the paper, apply the coats, and you have to let each one dry in between to become touch dry before you put the next coat on. And although it's a simple technique, there's quite a lot of different things that can go wrong. And even now, I've been doing it 20 years. I still have a lot of mistakes because especially on the
can go wrong.
Well, especially things like the shoulders. If you brush the color on, sometimes it lifts the underneath off. And it's not until the glaze firing that it becomes apparent that it's slightly patchy. Or if you have it too thick, it can bubble. And that's those two things. There's a really fine line between it being right and it being wrong. And because it looks so simple, there's nowhere to hide any errors. If it's wrong, it's wrong.
Yeah.
I'm having a real issue with the black and over the grey at the moment. So that just bubbles the whole time. So I'm trying to, find a different grey. But I've spoken to other people and they have had issues with the black as well. So I don't know whether it's, something has changed in the black stain that I get. I'm not sure.
It sounds like you're experiencing what a lot of potters do, is that there always seems to be a change.
Yeah. You can never become complacent with ceramics. It always keeps you on your toes. If you think you've got one thing sorted, then something else goes wrong.
Yeah.
So
one of the things that's striking me as I'm listening to you talk is that you must really need to have your full attention on your work. You're talking about different layers and cross-hatching and the right moisture level in each layer before you put on the next one. And I could see that for somebody who might lose their attention, that would be a difficult process. So you must really pay attention.
Yes, I do. I have a piece of paper that I, mark down how many layers I've put on of each one. Because sometimes you think, is that 3 or 4? So I do. I'm quite meticulous at, marking down exactly how many coats I've put on. And also, I've got children, so I work from home, but I, have to run them off to places and everything. So if I know I haven't got a full day especially a larger piece, it will take me all day to decorate. I can't do it if I know I've got to be off elsewhere. So especially with my bigger pieces, I tend to apply the paper one day, which will take like a whole day to work out the pattern. And then the next, I'll cover it back over with plastic. And then the next day I'll have a full day to paint it.
It takes you a full day to do one piece?
Pretty much. I mean, it is a very long process because of all the drying as well. In the summer, there's kind of an optimum time where things dry out kind of nicely, fairly quick, but not too quick. When it's at the height of summer, things dry out too quick, and that's not good because the paper starts to peel off and everything. But then, in the winter or when it's damp, things take so long to dry, so you can't, there's no speeding up as well. You can't start drying it with a hairdryer or anything because that would just lift the paper off. So it's, it's a simple technique, but there's a lot, that can go wrong. And I think that's why I've done it for so long, is that I've never got bored with it. It's like safe jeopardy, there's lots of things that can go wrong, but at the end of the day, it's just a pot, it's not. So it's enough of a, oh, will this go right? I don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting, eh? Because I think the naive person, the person who doesn't understand clay or those kind of things, will look at your work and go, "Oh, that probably doesn't take her very much time."
Yeah.
But in fact, what you're describing is a process that takes quite a lot of time.
But that's not the end of it as well, because I'll bisque fire, and when I get that out, I'll go over every edge just to crisp it up. Because because I apply so much colour on, when I peel the paper off, sometimes the edges can not really be jagged so much, but just slightly not as crisp as I'd like. So I go over each edge, then I glaze, fire it again, and then I'll sand everything after firing with wet and dry paper, because the engobe tends to be quite cat's tonguey, a bit rough, and I don't like that. I want them to be, tactile objects, especially like the little tiny ones. I want them to be held and enjoyed. So I'll sand, and then I apply a Renaissance wax, which just protects the surface. So there's all those kind of stages after it's been fired that, to be honest, are a bit boring. I don't like glazing, but I do glaze the inside, because although I don't see it as a functional piece, I see it as a decorative piece. I want it to be functional if somebody wants to use it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I sure do. So the outside is finished with your engobe, and the inside is finished with a glaze.
Yeah.
But the outside is then finished with some wax afterwards.
Yeah, the Renaissance wax, I think the British Museum came up with it to kind of protect. I think you can put it on, photographs and paintings and things like that. It doesn't give like a high sheen, but it just stops kind of finger marks and things like that. So yeah, I like to, I like things to be just right, and it
for sure.
takes its time, but I have a lot of, even now I have a lot of pieces that come out the kiln and they've bubbled or they've got a patch, and then that's it. It's taken you all that time to get to that point, and they just are seconds.
What do you do with your seconds? I have friends who say, "Oh, I'll never sell a second. I have seconds that I chuck in the bin." How about you? What do you do with your seconds?
Well, I think when they're so bad, I will just take a hammer to them, which my kids delighted a bit too much. It's like, hang on a minute. But my mother-in-law has a lot of kind of hedgehog homes and stuff like that, pots that were seconds. But generally now they're kind of good enough to sell, but they're not gallery, they're not so good to go to galleries. So I have open studios in June every year, so I will sell them at quite reduced prices. Which is quite nice. I had some this year, and somebody bought a couple of pieces and said, "Oh, I didn't think I'd ever be able to afford your work," but he was very delighted to have these slight seconds. So it was nice. Good that they go to loving homes. I'm quite pleased with that.
That's right. And out in the garden to leave for a hedgehog to wander into, it sounds like. Yeah, very good. Now tell us about the color you use and why you choose the colors you do, and what kind of approach are you getting at when you're thinking of color?
Okay. So the colors I use now are all so on the engobes, and then I'll use commercial stains to get the colors. When I was at university, I would do vitreous slips, which are pretty much engobes, but I would decorate them with more oxides, so cobalt and copper and manganese, to be a bit more random, I think. But I like I like the commercial colours, but it's taken me quite a while to come up with a range that I like. When you look online and you see all these, like a kid in a sweet shop, all these different colours and amazing names and everything, and you try them out, and like a bright orange becomes a peach or something. They're quite disappointing quite a lot of the time. So it's taken me a long while. I've bought a lot of commercial stains in the past, and probably 60% of them I haven't I don't use because they didn't come out very well. But it's taken me a while to get a range that sits nicely together. I used to use kind of turquoises and a red iron oxide, but I didn't like the way they sat together, so they've kind of ditched them. So it's always nice when you try a new color and it goes well with the other colors that you've got. So yeah, it's taken a while to get to a range of colors that I think work nicely together and on their own as well. Mm-hmm. My favorite combination at the moment is an emerald and a yellow. But the first time I did it, I opened the kiln and my first response was, oh, yuck. It was, it was so bright. And I just thought it was horrible. And it stayed on my shelf for a while. And after a couple of months, it became my favorite piece. And I really loved the combination. And I mean, that's my favorite combination now, but I've dialed the yellow down a bit. So it's not quite so intense. So it's a pale yellow, white and emerald. And it's just beautiful together. I'm really, really pleased with that combination. So yeah, that's my favorite combo at the moment.
So you work with a palette, do you? That when you're going to color your work, do you select ahead of time the palette that you want to start to work with?
Generally, yeah. Generally, I'll have an idea of what I want to do. Like sometimes it will just be the white and another color, which is a fairly simple thing to decide. And then with the other, the leaf patterns have become a bit more intricate. So I started kind of overlaying color over color, and generally it's a light color underneath and a darker color on top. And it's a bit like screen printing, where the color you apply last is actually the background color. And so you go from kind of light to dark. So I'll work on kind of pieces for a gallery that would then sit well together. So yeah, I generally have an idea of what color combos to do. And I'll work to commissions. People will say they want this color or this piece in this color, so I'm quite happy to do that. But yeah, I don't have a very varied palette. It's all it tends to be kind of blues, blacks. There's a purple, green. It's quite limited. And erring on more kind of slightly muted, when I decorate them and I do the peel and reveal, they're quite intense colors. I think my phone makes them look quite intense as well, but once they're fired, they're toned down a bit, which I much prefer. Yeah.
And now, what do your clients say about your palette and your color? Obviously, you're in lots of galleries and selling your work professionally. What kind of reaction do people have to your work?
I think the most popular colors tend to be like the sea blue and the blue gray and like black and gray. annoyingly, the black and grey is the one that I have most issues with, but that's kind of one of my favourite combos. But yeah, I think people like the colour range that I have. The emerald and yellow one that is my favourite at the moment. That seems to be the one that I'm making most for people at the moment, which is interesting.
Yeah, well, we make what we like, don't we? Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Hey, now we this show is about color and surface design, of course, and so here we are talking about that. But there needs to be a balance in relation to the form. How do you think about the form and color and surface design in their relation to each other?
Very much, it's all one piece. The way I decorate, I like, the decoration is part of the form. And I'm especially liking making like big hot air balloon type forms at the moment, smaller bases so they look like they're, on tiptoes. And the big volume, is great for decorating. So when I first started making them, there'd be like a front and a back, it would be very obvious. But now I'm kind of intertwining them more, the stem curves around the form and then interconnects. So I very much think about how the pattern will fit that shape. Which gets me quite excited, really. Yeah.
So tell us how you do that. Like, what's your methodology, I guess, in terms of how you approach the form with your work?
Well, interestingly, sometimes I don't know how the piece is going to be decorated. I'll make a form, and I'll kind of ask it, how are you going, what do you want to be like? And sometimes, I'll start cutting a stem, and it just kind of, sits right. Or, I mean, sometimes I cut and I recut because, a flat piece going onto a 3-dimensional form, you want it to go down, and it, you wrap it around and it goes up. So it's taken me a long while to, decorate on a 3-dimensional piece. And there's been a lot of trial and error, and, making things and going, oh, I don't like how that bit works, or I really like how that bit works, I'm going to do that again. So I don't do any sketching. I don't do, because it would be easy to, decorate a platter or something with cut bits of paper because it's flat. But the moment it goes on a 3-dimensional piece, it's taken a while to learn, well, if I cut it this shape, it will then flow round. So yeah, there's a lot of trial and error. And then, just patterns evolve and become more intricate, and you do this and you think, oh, I could add that to it. And with the daisy ones, I started off fairly simple, but then I put the extra colour on, and it's, it makes this lovely kind of star shape at the top where there is no paper. So there's, things like that you discover by doing it.
Sometimes they just occur, don't they? And then in a kind of organic way.
Yeah.
And then you can remember that because you keep meticulous notes.
Yeah. Yeah, and also because I film everything peeling off, if somebody wants something that's similar, I can rewatch the video and see how it looks all the way around. So I have it's a record as well as being something fun to look at.
Yes, that's really a smart thing to do. I think the notion of keeping track of what you do, and you were talking about how many layers do I put on, and I keep track of, that's a smart thing. I'm going to remember that because I sometimes run into that myself. But I think the idea of tracking and keeping records is Very smart. And the other thing that I love that I hadn't thought of before is to video record each of those things
Yeah,
as well so that you can go back and reference it for
yeah,
yourself.
yeah.
What a great idea.
Yeah,
Yes, absolutely. So you've talked a little bit about some of your challenges that you've had with some of the new stains that you're getting, right? You said
yeah,
the black's just not quite working and
yeah,
the gray's not just quite working. And some of the challenges that you've had with figuring out how to cut a piece, particularly like your stems of your plants, right? So
yeah,
that they flow around the piece
yeah.
effectively. As you've developed this style, what would you say is your biggest challenge and how did you overcome that?
I think the biggest challenge is, what I've talked about, the bubbling and the patchiness, and I'm not sure I have overcome that yet. It's always striving for, this elusive perfection. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, I think when I when I was younger, I'd look at other people and I'd go, I'd be really happy if I was making your work. I
Hmm.
was very self-critical, and I never really liked anything that I made in the past. And I think probably the biggest thing is, discovering a style that I actually really enjoy making. Um,
Hmm.
and yeah, I still am quite self-critical, and sometimes, I'll get a piece out and think, oh, that's dreadful. But sometimes I'll get out a piece and I'll be really proud, and go, yeah, that's good. I've got a couple of pieces on my shelf actually that I don't want to get rid of yet. I don't want to
Hmm.
sell because, I think, especially with the decoration, quite often, it's nice from a couple of angles, but then, there's one that's not, quite right, and the one on my shelf, it looks nice from every angle. And I think, that I probably can't make anything as nice as that ever again.
So
so
that piece is staying home.
so I've put a huge price on that one, so I don't really want to sell it.
Hey, now tell me, you've said that can be self-critical, and yet you have still worked away at it to make it great.
Yeah.
Many people would have given up. They let that self-critical component overwhelm them in some ways. What has helped you not let that critical voice in our head win the battle? What's kept you in the game?
Well, um, I mean, potters in general have to be resilient, because you do get a lot of knocks. You get you get a lot of things that go wrong. And actually, when I left university, I went and worked in a studio called the Chocolate Factory in East London, and there were about 20 artists there. And it was a great time, and I was making work. I was still decorating with ongos, but I was making ceramic lighting, so hand-built bases, throne shades, and I would have I'd have a 3 foot by 3 foot kiln that would take months of work, and you'd have a disastrous firing where everything went wrong. So there were a lot of tears and a lot of times when you just thought, oh, what am I doing? And actually, I left there when I was expecting my first child, so she's now 18. But I didn't want to touch clay ever again. It was like, I'm done with it. I'd had so many, things go wrong, and actually, for 4 years I didn't touch clay, and I just immersed myself in motherhood. And it was only when she started school, and it was a very arty school, and the headmistress discovered that I, was a potter, and I helped them buy a kiln and glazes and clays, and went in and volunteered there. And it was only through the kids' enjoyment of making clay that, then reignited my, passion again. And actually I got the kids like really lovely white earthenware and the nice Amico velvet underglazes in the bright colours, because I think there's nothing worse than school buff clay with a, insipid clear glaze over the top. It's very uninspiring. So, these kids would be making beautiful, flat tiles with gorgeous bright colours. And their excitement at seeing these pieces, it made me want to do it again. And actually I'd kept all my stuff, so I must have subconsciously known that I would go back to clay, but at the time I'd had enough.
Mm-hmm. It can be very challenging, can't it? I feel like I keep being given the opportunity to learn patience, because clay requires a lot of patience, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Patience, resilience. Yeah. And actually, when I pack a kiln, my motto is, always expect the worst. And if it's good, it's a bonus, it's, that's the way I look at it, really. So
absolutely. Yeah. Now, what advice would you have? We've talked a lot about your journey, and you just talked a little bit about that period of time where you stopped, and then the bug got you again, which I'm grateful for. What advice would you have for a budding potter, somebody who is just getting going in the clay work?
Well, it depends on what they want to do. If they're interested in throwing, I would say find a course, like an intensive week's course or something, because I used to teach evening classes, and people would come along each week for a couple of hours, and they'd really want to learn how to throw, but they only had a couple of hours each week. So by the time the next week came along, they were back, still struggling to center or whatever. Whereas if you do an intensive course, week's course somewhere, you can practice, which is just what it needs. You need time to, do one, take it off, do another one, that kind of, and also have fun, because, that's what it's about, really. It's, playing for a living. I feel very, very lucky to have it's more of a life choice than a job, and the moment it becomes just a job, that's, it's not, generally most people don't make a huge amount of money out of doing this. It's more that they have to do it. It's a passion. If I haven't touched clay for a few days, I've become, I've just got to get out there. So definitely practice, have fun, and just try and make what you want to make rather than what you think other people want to buy. Because if you always think, well, I'll need to, I'll try and make this because I need to sell it, and if your heart isn't in it, it comes out in the piece. If you enjoy making something, I think that shows in the piece. I fill my pots with love, and hopefully people can get that from seeing them. I don't know.
I totally agree with you. It's the energy that we put into our work comes out on the other side when somebody's looking at it. So I agree. Georgie, thank you so much for being with us today. I really appreciate you spending the time and the energy and sharing your ideas of how you make your beautiful work.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you, Bob. I've really enjoyed it.
Thanks. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Color and Ceramics podcast with Bob Acton and his guests. Please help others find the podcast by subscribing to this podcast wherever you find your podcasts, such as iTunes, Spotify, Amazon Music, YouTube, or other podcatchers. And don't forget to give us a review. We'll see you next time.